what we're doing is that we're building everything and designing everything with the greater vision in mind. Right? So everything we're doing today becomes a piece of the puzzle of the greater futuristic vision.
Welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Just sit back, relax, and learn from the leaders of today. It's a journey. Each one is different, unique, inspiring. Let's get started. This episode is powered by J Ventures, a community-driven VC fund in Silicon Valley in partnership with Leumitech, sponsored by Homeward Ventures, Hippo Insurance, Upwest Labs, Synergy Global, Hillel at Stanford, Leap, Birthright Excel, Serona Partners, and in media partnership with CTech. Hello everyone and welcome to 20-Minute Leaders. Today we're talking with the CEO of a fascinating company, Stor.ai. Meet Mendel Gniwisch. Mendel is the CEO of Stor.ai, a leading provider of end-to-end digitization solutions for grocers. He moved to Israel in 2018 because of his passion for Israeli innovation, with the intention of helping Israeli startups go global, a passion which has directly contributed to his success at Stor.ai. Prior to being appointed CEO, he was the company's Executive Vice President of Business Development, spearheading Stor.ai's 300% year-on-year growth in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Previously, he was Vice President of Business Development and Vice President of Retail Development at Impax Media, a digital communications company for grocers, where he was responsible for the company's strategic positioning in the grocery and advertising industries and working with retailers and engineers to tailor products to the company's network. Throughout Mr. Gniwisch's career, he has been in the forefront of building new organizations from the ground up, both a strategic developer and a marketer, challenging the status quo to make a positive impact on people's lives. He is also actively engaged in pro bono work to help other Israeli companies expand outside the country. The work that you're doing with Stor.ai is fascinating on many fronts, particularly this question of the intersection of technology with the physical world, with the retail, with food, with grocers, understanding, fulfillment, supply chains, consumer behavior, the way that these businesses are operating, but then this whole sphere having to do with technology. And so that is exactly, my personal interest. And I'm excited to pick your brain a little bit about your own, the journey of Stor.ai, your own journey, and then a little bit about your insights as to the vertical in the world. So thank you very, very much for joining me, Mendel. Tell me just a little bit about yourself, the transition. Today, you're the CEO of Stor.ai. What has your personal journey been like leading up to Stor.ai?
So personally, I was born to parents who are chabadnikim, but also entrepreneurs. And my dad was always taking us from one country to the next, from one city to the next, following his dreams. He was one of the first people to sell anything online. He was selling jewelry online in the 90s and early 2000s. And built up a pretty good name for himself. He sold a business called ice.com in 2007. And so I grew up in an entrepreneurial family. And so, I always had a passion for entrepreneurialism, for business. And when I married an Israeli woman and brought her to Canada, it was pretty easy for her to convince me to come back to Israel, where we could join this amazing startup nation and bring something extraordinary to the world. And so that's basically my journey in terms of how I got here. The journey within Stor.ai is that I started about 5 years ago as a VP Biz Dev. And my role was to do partnerships with other companies that would, extend and expand our product and our offering and give us the really interesting solution for grocers. And I was recently promoted to CEO when the last CEO left the company. And it's obviously humbling for me to be offered this position, but also a huge opportunity because of the amazing team that I have. I was able to say yes, knowing that we're going to be wildly successful. So that's really my kind of story into this.
Well, so just picking up on that, you're joining a startup. It's a fast-growing startup, still a startup. How many people were you when you joined?
We were 16 people when I joined.
Wow. So
And
16 people.
We're at about 70 now.
Incredible. So 16 people. There's already a dynamic in place where you're joining. There's a vision, there's a mission, there's some history, and all of a sudden you find yourself, and you're looking at the CEO and the decisions that they're made. And I'm guessing that there is some distance between, your position as VP and the decisions that are being made. And all of a sudden here, a few years later, you're now the one running the ship, right? And you're running the narrative, and you're picking up on, and you have to basically adopt also that whole experience from the beginning and owned that story. What is that like, owning that story of a startup as if from inception? Because now you are running the ship of Stor.ai, and I'm sure it's just a fascinating transition.
Absolutely. I think one of the reasons that I was elected to be CEO is because throughout my time previous to me being CEO, before I was CEO, I was always involved in the vision, in the mission, in setting the strategy, in understanding the needs of the greater market. Obviously, we're a very strong player here in Israel, but really our bigger market opportunities are, of course, outside of Israel. And so I was always in touch with the foreign world, the world of the US and the UK market. And so that was probably a big part of why I became CEO. And so the transition in terms of strategically leading the company is actually not very big. The bigger transition is now being responsible for the well-being of the team, for the collaboration, for the execution and the focus of the team. And that's really where the bigger transition happened for me. And all of those things are absolutely critical. So when you look at how to be a successful CEO of a tech startup or of any company, really, it's all about your people. It starts with the people, then it moves on to the focus. Making sure everyone's focusing on the right thing, and then making sure that once they're focusing on the right thing, they're executing. So those are actually our three pillars of our company that we preach and that we try to live and breathe at all times. It's team, focus, and execution.
Incredible. Okay, so tell me a little bit about grocers, the physical and digital world in 2022. What's happening even before Stor.ai? Where are we at today? What's sort of the big problem?
So if you really understand grocery, and I think that one of the things that grocery tech startups have to understand if they want to be successful is that grocery is an extremely complex business that has been building layers and layers of complexity over the last 100 years. In 1916, the first traditional grocery store was established. It was called Piggly Wiggly in the US. And that's where you walk throughout the aisles. And ever since then, there have been layers and layers of complexity that are being built up. Brands, positioning of products, advertising within stores, inventory management. It is an absolute beast of a business and of an industry. And so what is so difficult about penetrating this industry is actually finding solutions for the very, very, very many layers of complexity that exist within the grocery world. I think once you understand the actual grocery world, which is what we do so well, especially because we've hired executives from the grocery world, once you understand that it is such a complex beast and that you can bring value to specific areas of that complexity through technology, then you really have the opportunity to make a big impact. So if we take, if we get a little bit more specific, let's say we want to sell groceries online, which is, our core product, right? So companies like traditional e-commerce platforms like Salesforce, for example, they're trying to get into the grocery space, but they're struggling. And the main reason they're struggling is because of how complex it is. So I'll give you a simple example. If you have a barcode, which would typically be, let's say, your UPC, or if you're in a warehouse, you'd scan a barcode and it would connect to your inventory management, et cetera, et cetera. In grocery, if you have a barcode for a weighable product like a pack of meat, right, or something like that, half the barcode is the meat and half is like the weight. And so basically, you're dealing with a layer of complexity that works in store, but if you don't have that knowledge of the ins and outs and the little tiny details of grocery, you'll never be successful. And so that's something that we do really well on many, many different levels, is understanding the real pains of a grocer and then being able to bring technological solutions to those needs.
Right. And so if we're looking at the transition with the solution that Stor.ai provides to the exact problem that you mentioned, that extra layer of complexity, how are you leveraging technology to make it simpler?
Well, really what we're doing is, let's say, for example, understanding that retailers or many retailers work with inventory management on a per store basis, right? So
Okay.
each store will have their own inventory that obviously works its way back up to the general inventory management system. Many retailers are using their POS system, like their checkout till system, to actually manage that inventory. Many retailers are using traditional inventory management systems. But when we understand that, and then we integrate and sync with those inventory management systems on a per store or a per warehouse level, we could then bring a technological solution, which is that integration, to actually be in sync with what's going on online. So think about it. If you came to a grocer with a typical e-commerce platform, right, like a Shopify or a Magento or a Salesforce, they're typically used to connecting to one inventory management system, pulling the data and publishing it online, right? We have to connect to many, many different inventory management systems and then publish them each to their own store level. That's one way where the complexity of grocery is something that's not typical. And when you have a technological solution that you've built over years to address that issue, you could really have, what we could call in our industry, you can have a technological moat, or you can have something that really makes you different than any competitors trying to get into the space.
Right. Now, for looking at the complexity of running, this type of operation, and it sounds like there's a lot of logistics behind it. There's a lot of operations. There's a lot of syncing and integration, which is exactly where Stor.ai is coming into place. If we were to rethink, in your opinion, the way that we're looking at grocers today, the physical and retail, the physical and digital world, is this the right solution? I mean, and what I'm considering right now is this question of, if we're looking worldwide at the way that we're actually, the way that our digital world works in the physical world, is this the right way to run? And I'm trying to think, 20, 30 years into the future, of how do we continue integrating between the physical and digital world?
So our vision at Stor.ai for the long-term vision of this industry is very different than what it is today, right? So the way we see this industry going is a combination of digital and physical, and e-commerce and in-store, but where the in-store shopping becomes more like a shuk, a market experience, right? Where when you walk into the store, you're only buying fresh goods, and you're only buying things that are appealing to your senses, to your taste. You see a vendor selling pizza in a beautiful pizza oven. You have a fishmonger selling fish and a professional butcher. And that's really, what we look at where millennials are going, is they're going back to basics with these things. They want to go to the butcher. They want to go to the fishmonger. They want to touch the fish and things like that. But on the other hand, nobody cares to touch the box of cereal or the roll of toilet paper before they bring it home, right? So all the, let's say, mundane things, or the dry goods that you actually buy week to week and you don't really care about, and even things that are like a little bit more specialized, like maybe a cheese or something, some of those things, if you already know what you want, all of that is going to be done online. And the fulfillment of that will either be done through a delivery or a pickup in store, but all of it will be robotic, robotic fulfillment. There'll be no picking, and there will be no people walking around stores. What's going to happen is, when you go to a grocery store in the future, it's all going to be about this experience, right? So you walk into the store and you'll have maybe a shook of different market vendors, of a fishmonger, of a butcher, and whatnot. You'll go and you'll have the senses, you'll have the tastes and the smells, and then you'll buy whatever you want in the store, maybe a new kind of beer or a new kind of cheese, and then your basics will be either delivered to you in store or sent to your house, all with a layer of digitization and personalization that's above it all. So even when you're in store, right, you'll open up your application and you'll see, hey, there's a new kind of cheese and we know that you love cheeses. Why don't you try it? Or your favorite craft beer company has released a new flavor. Go give it a try. So all of these things will be in sync. And then when you go back to your online, those same things that you've experienced in store will then be pushed to you online, so that you have a really wonderful cross-channel experience as a consumer.
Wow. And so as the CEO running this ship, you're balancing 2022 in today's world with the needs of these different stores, and their needs are obviously based on the current experiences and the current vision of what some may have of what's happening today, because obviously not everybody's going to have this grand vision of how the world is going to look. So how do you balance as a company, and you want to strategically position yourself as a market leader in that greater vision? That's, where the Holy Grail is. How do you position yourself with that? You're both running today's Stor.ai, but you're also navigating and creating an opportunity so that Stor.ai can continue to lead also in this next phase.
Yeah, it's a good question. What we're doing is that we're building everything and designing everything with the greater vision in mind. Right? So everything we're doing today becomes a piece of the puzzle of the greater futuristic vision. So, for example, when we have our picking application, which is the best picking application for order fulfillment in the world, right? When we build that, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, this is an application that in the future can support all sorts of in-store digitization, right? And then when we build our e-commerce, we're saying, well, what do we need to do to support future e-commerce needs or things like that? So, for example, one of the things that we have in our roadmap is pre-ordering products before you go into the physical store. So imagine we have this great store that we talked about. It's only like a marketplace, and it's only the products that you really love. But before you go into the store, you know that there's always a big line at the cheese counter, right? And you know that you want a few specific things. So in your application, you just click on the cheeses that you want, and you walk in and you pick them up, and they're ready for you, right? So building towards that and thinking about partnerships with the right robotic fulfillment companies and all the different things that go into the next level of the digital retailer, we're building all of those things side by side with our layer of data and personalization that is surrounding it all. And as we continue to build, we get closer and closer to our vision. Whereas in the very near future, we'll have all the pieces of the puzzle to have that vision in place, and we can even start selling it to the retailer as a futuristic store that he or she can start bringing even in the next 5 years.
Wow, and obviously it's not a black or white thing, right? I mean, because right now we're talking about the in-store experience, the physical experience, and then we're talking about the digital world, and it's not a moonshot thought. The idea that yes, we may want to experience the stores a certain way. Just because I go to the store to experience the cheese doesn't mean I have to walk out with that cheese, right? I mean, logistically, there's a difference between the experience versus what happens when I get home, and potentially with, if you manage to solve that supply chain, you're able to get home and the cheese is already waiting for you, and it got there before you left the store,
right?
Which and that obviously opens new windows of opportunity. Now, from a leadership perspective, you're now the CEO of Stor.ai. And I'm going back to this because this is such a special situation that is so uncommon and it's so fascinating for me. If you're looking internally at this transition, was it trivial? Was it, did everybody just, got on board? did you have to make any changes? How did you approach this idea of you becoming the CEO?
Yeah, so it's not trivial at all, actually. I'm quite a young guy. I'm only 30 years old. So many of my peers and the people reporting to me are a lot older than me, right? And so it was definitely not trivial, and I had to gain their trust. The good news was that I was already had a personal relationship with all of the senior executives. We are all, we have that level of friendship. But then I had to prove myself as a leader in this space. And I did do a few, calculated moves in order to do that. Firstly, by creating our three pillars, right? So creating an infrastructure for success, implementing additional, let's say, OKRs is one thing, right? Taking best practices from the best companies in the world and implementing them here at Stor.ai to make sure that we are the gold standard of a place to work. Now, obviously, it doesn't happen overnight. Rome wasn't built in a day, right? But we're already at a point today where I think, humbly, that I've been accepted as the leader, and we're able to make that, that move forward together as a team rather than, the ambiguity of what's going on. So it did take some time, and it wasn't secure right away. And the first reaction that I got from some of the executives was, well, we don't know if we're going to stay. We were in love with the last CEO, and I was also. And I said, that's a perfectly, it's a perfectly acceptable statement, right? I understand you and why you would maybe not want to stay, but let's give it a shot for a few months and see how things go. And I tried to lead with compassion and allow people to be their best selves. My leadership style is very much to give people the responsibility and the accountability. So we make them responsible for their things and then accountable at the end. And then when you end up doing that, and when you have such talented and experienced people, you get to really, rely on them to do what they're doing, and they come back with results. So, very much not a micromanager. I'm very much a big vision, kind of big picture kind of person. And when I do that, and they've learned over the last few months that they can trust me to give them the responsibility and then expect the accountability of the results, they've realized that, I can be somebody who they can continue to develop their career with and build an enormous company with.
Mendel, thank you so much. This was so enjoyable and fascinating, and best of luck with Stor.ai. I love the fact that your vision, it takes whatever you have today, but you're thinking through consumer behavior and you're thinking about the changing world, and you're presenting a greater vision for what could be and what Stor.ai could position itself to be a leader at. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Best of luck, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Thank you. Bye-bye.